The sign was laminated in plastic wrap, not because anyone told her to do it that way, because she had learned after the third Saturday that cardboard and November rain made the words bleed into nothing by noon, and she could not afford to have the words disappear. So she had pressed the cardboard between two sheets of contact paper from the dollar store, sealed the edges with a glue stick, and by the fourth Saturday, the sign was weatherproof. It read, "Lemonade $1 for Dad's Headstone." She was 9 years old. Her name was Nora Hale. She weighed 63 pounds. She was 4 feet and 3 inches tall in the rain boots that were one size too large because they had been bought last winter when she was still growing and her mother had bought ahead. She set up at milepost 14 on Route 9 southbound, 2 miles south of Carver's Feed and Grain every Saturday morning. She had been doing this for 68 Saturdays, not 68 Saturdays with occasional breaks. 68 consecutive Saturdays, including the one in February when the temperature dropped to 19 degrees and her thermos of lemonade was almost frozen solid by 10 in the morning, and the one in July when the heat index hit 104 and she soaked a bandana in the cooler and tied it around her neck the way her father used to do on the job. And the 3 Saturdays in April when her school had events she was supposed to attend, and she had gone to the school events and come to Route 9 after setting up her folding card table in the afternoon light instead of the morning gray. She had never missed a Saturday. The card table had one short leg. She had long ago compensated with a folded plastic bag tucked underneath the short corner. This was the same solution her father had used for the kitchen table at home, which also had one short leg. He had wedged a flattened Marlboro box under it and declared the problem solved. She had told him a folded grocery bag was more adjustable. He had considered this seriously and agreed she had a point. He always took her points seriously. That was one of the things she had known about him before she had the language for it, the way a child knows the quality of a person before they know the word for quality. Her father's name was written on her left sleeve in black marker, not his full name, just Dad. She had written it the morning of her first Saturday 68 weeks ago, and she had rewritten it each week when it faded, always in the same place, always in the same block letters, because some things needed to stay exactly as they were. Her name was Nora. His name had been Ray Hale. He had been a long-haul truck driver out of Mill Haven, Tennessee, 38 years old, with a thermos he never went anywhere without, and a habit of stopping for stranded motorists that her mother had always called reckless and he had always called basic decency. He had died on this road at this mile marker on a November morning 3 years ago. He had seen a motorcycle burning on the shoulder, and he had pulled over. That was what her mother knew. That was what the county investigator had written down. A truck driver stopped. He pulled a man from the wreck. He was struck by oncoming traffic. The rest was what Nora knew, because she had asked the questions no one else had bothered to ask, and she had written down the answers in the small notebook she kept in the kangaroo pocket of her father's Peterbilt hoodie alongside the laminated school photo. She watched every car before it slowed. She had learned over 68 Saturdays to read the decision in the deceleration itself. The way a car's brake lights came on early meant someone was genuinely considering it, and the way they came on late and then immediately released meant someone had seen her sign and chosen not to see it. She had become, by necessity, an expert in the specific body language of people deciding not to stop. The morning of the 68th Saturday arrived the way all her Saturdays arrived, in the blue-gray of pre-dawn, while her mother was already an hour into her double shift at the diner across town. Nora had set her alarm for 5:45. She had folded the newspaper she stuffed in her rain boots against the cold. She had packed the powdered lemonade into her backpack alongside the folding card table she dragged to the bus stop every week without fail. By 7:12 she was set up at milepost 14 in 41 degrees and a drizzle that hadn't quite decided to become rain. The first car that morning was a white Expedition with a family inside. She watched it slow. She watched the driver's head turn. She watched the brake lights hold for one full second and then release. The expedition accelerated past her, and she watched it until it disappeared around the bend at the bottom of the hill. There was a Support Our Troops sticker on the rear window. The children in the back didn't turn around. She smoothed the laminated photo against her thigh with her thumb. Once, twice. Then she reset her grip on the table edge and waited. The second car was a man in a personal pickup, mid-50s, day off from somewhere, the kind of man who stopped at lemonade stands because he was the kind of man who had been raised to. He bought a cup. He stood there while she poured it, and she thought for 30 seconds that he might be one of the ones who stayed long enough to hear the story. He asked why the sign said Headstone. She told him her dad died right here on this road 3 years ago, and she was saving for a marker. His face did the thing faces do when they understand something they hadn't wanted to understand. He set a $5 bill on the table's edge. He didn't pick up his lemonade. He got back in his pickup and drove away. The $5 sat on the table. She hadn't touched it yet. Something about the way he'd left it felt more like an apology than a donation, and she wasn't ready to accept an apology from a stranger for a thing that wasn't his fault. The third stop was a woman in a county lanyard. She did not get out of her car. She rolled the window down and told Nora this roadside was not safe for a child and asked where her mother was. Nora said her mother was at work. The woman said there were proper channels for family assistance. She took a photograph of the sign with her phone, not of Nora, of the sign the way you document a code violation and not a person. Then she drove away. The fourth stop cost the most because it started differently. A silver sedan pulled over. 2 people got out. A man in a county polo shirt and a woman with a clipboard. The man crouched to Nora's eye level. He asked her to tell him everything. He listened carefully. He put his hand on her shoulder and said the words she had been waiting 3 years to hear from someone with official standing. "I am going to make some calls today, sweetheart. This isn't right." His aide wrote something on the clipboard. They walked back to their car. They drove away. What Nora could not know was that the aide's phone was already lit before they reached the on-ramp. She was texting Dale Pruitt, Commissioner of Millhaven County, District 4. 4 words, "Hail kid is back." Nora sat in her camping chair and looked at the bent guardrail on the south shoulder of Route 9. The rust on it was old and permanent. The guardrail had absorbed the impact of a motorcycle 3 years ago, and it had never been replaced, just bent back into approximate alignment close enough to pass inspection, far enough from straight that anyone who knew what had happened here could still see it. The kangaroo pocket of her father's Peterbilt hoodie held 4 things: the laminated photo, the Walmart receipt folded in thirds, a small notebook with a green cover, 3/4 full of penciled observations she had made over 68 Saturdays' weather conditions, time of arrival, number of cars that slowed, number that stopped, amounts collected, running total, and a folded piece of notebook paper on which she had written, in the week after a county building visit 3 weeks ago, every detail she could remember from a conversation she had overheard through a 4-inch gap in an office door. She had not shown the notebook to anyone. She had not shown the second piece of paper to anyone. She had the Walmart receipt ready because she understood with the practical clarity of a child who had been failed by official processes that evidence needed to be contemporaneous, written that same night, the specific phrases captured while memory was still exact. She was still at her card table at 9:40 in the morning when she heard the engine. Not a car engine. Something deeper and more deliberate. The particular sound a motorcycle makes when the rider is not in a hurry, not performing anything, just moving through the world at the pace a person chooses when they are going somewhere they always go. The bike pulled onto the gravel shoulder about 30 yards back. It was a large machine, black and chrome, built for distance rather than display, and the man on it was built the same way. Large settled the particular density of a man who had stopped worrying about how he occupied space and was simply present in it. He wore a black leather vest over a dark thermal. The back of the vest said Iron Riders, MC, in arced letters, and below it, Millhaven TN. He did not get off the bike right away. He sat with the engine off and looked at the bent guardrail the same way Nora looked at it. The same quality of attention, not curiosity, something older than curiosity. The look of a person returning to a place that has been in their chest for a long time without a name. His name was Colt Mercer. He was 52 years old. He had a burn scar on the left side of his neck, raised permanent copper-colored, the kind that settles into ridges when it heals rather than smoothing flat. He had a slight tremor in his right hand that was managed and old, the kind a person stops noticing after enough years. He had been riding Route 9 every Saturday morning for 3 years. Not the bypass. Route 9. Past Carver's Feed and Grain, past milepost 14, past the bent guardrail. He sat for a few minutes looking at it before riding on. He had not told anyone in the Iron Riders about this habit. He had not found language for it that didn't sound like something he wasn't. He had been the man in the burning motorcycle. He had always known that. What he did not know, what he had spent 3 years and 6 months trying to find, was the name of the man who had pulled him out. The Millhaven County Sheriff's report had listed the deceased as an unidentified passing motorist at time of filing. The correction had been made 3 days later in an amendment never publicly circulated: Raymond Hale, truck driver, Millhaven, Tennessee. But by then, the story had moved on. By then, there was no story at all. Colt had hired a private investigator 8 months after the accident. Dead ends. He had gone to the county records office himself and been told the full file was in restricted processing pending a compensation review. He had gone back 6 months later and been told the same thing. He had driven past this guardrail every Saturday for 3 years because the specific unease of leaving before something is finished had never gone away, and this was the only place he knew to return to. He pulled off his right glove. He climbed off the bike. He was 6'2", and he moved with the careful deliberateness of a large man who had learned a long time ago that his size registered before his intentions did. He walked toward the card table slowly. He stopped about 8 feet away because the girl was watching him the way a person watches something they've been trying to read, and he wanted to give her time to read him clearly. She stood up from her camping chair. She walked around the table, 3 deliberate steps on the wet gravel, the left boot landing slightly heavier than the right, the oversized sleeve of the hoodie falling down over her hand. She didn't push it back up. She stopped in front of his bike and looked up at him. She held the laminated photo flat against her chest with her right hand, not showing it, holding it the way you hold something you carry everywhere. She said 7 words. "My dad died here. He saved someone." She said it the way you read a street address. Flat, certain. No wobble in it. No invitation for sympathy. Just the facts she had been carrying for 3 years arranged in the order that mattered most to her. Colt went completely still. Not the stillness of surprise. Something slower and older than that. His eyes moved to the bent guardrail. His right hand, without any direction from the rest of him, came up and touched the burn scar on the left side of his neck. He looked back at her. "What was his name?" he said. 4 words. Low and careful. The tone of a man asking a question he was not certain he was ready to have answered. "Ray Hale," she said. "He drove a semi. He doesn't have a headstone. The county says we don't qualify." She reached into the kangaroo pocket and produced the laminated photo. She held it out toward him without releasing it, showing not giving. She had never let go of it. He took it with both hands. He held it with the care you give something that isn't yours to drop. A little girl in a yellow dress, 5 years old, brown eyes, a gap in her front teeth from a tooth that had just come out. On the back in black marker, a working man's handwriting. "My girl." The whole reason. Dad. "He stopped here," she said, pointing at the guardrail without looking away from Colt's face. He pulled the man out. Then the truck hit him. My mom says he was already helping when it happened. Colt was watching his own hand, the way his thumb had stopped moving, the way his jaw had set. He reached up slowly and pulled his collar to the side. He showed her the burn scar on the left side of his neck, the full length of it from just below his ear down to his collarbone, the permanent record of a burning motorcycle on a November morning 3 years ago. the record of the morning she had heard about her whole life and had never expected to find a face for. "Your dad pulled me out of that bike," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I've been riding this road every Saturday for 3 years because I couldn't find out who he was." The drizzle hit the plastic-wrapped sign. A crow called once from the tree line and went quiet. A semi passed at highway speed and the air moved around them and neither of them moved. Nora looked at the scar. She looked at his face. She looked at the scar again. She did not cry. She held her lower lip between her teeth the way she did when she was thinking very carefully about something important. Her hand moved to the laminated photo and she smoothed it against her thigh. "Once. 3 years," she said. "Every Saturday. Right here." "Yes." She exhaled through her nose, slow and audible, the ritual breath she had developed over 68 Saturdays of hoping that today would be different. Then she reached into the kangaroo pocket again, deeper this time. She produced a folded receipt, narrow thermal paper from a Walmart register folded carefully in thirds, the handwriting on the back in pencil small and deliberate. "3 weeks ago, she said I was at the county building with my mom. She went to the restroom. I was on the bench in the hallway. The door to the main office was open about 4 inches. She unfolded the receipt. I wrote down what I heard she said. She held it out to him. He took it. He read it once. The penciled fragments were a child's attempt to capture that same night at the kitchen table exactly what she had heard through a 4-inch gap in a county office door. Second appeal denied this morning. She's out of options under county code. The beautification account is at $312,000. Not one headstone paid for in 14 months. Not one. The rezoning vote is next month. By the time Section C gets cleared, there's no record to connect to. Problem solves itself. I know what I'm doing, Gerald. I've been doing it for years. He read it a second time. Then he folded the receipt exactly as she had folded it and placed it back in her hand. He closed both his hands around her smaller ones for 3 seconds. Her cracked knuckles and cold fingers held still for a moment inside his larger scarred ones. Before he picked up his phone, he looked at her directly. "Your dad did not let go of me on that road," he said. "I'm not letting go of this. You understand what I'm saying?" She nodded once. She understood exactly what he was saying. She had been waiting 3 years to hear someone say it. He dialed from memory. 9 seconds. "Hawkeye, it's Colt, Route 9 mile post 14. Come now, bring brimstone." 2 seconds of silence. "How many, everyone?" Within 6 minutes, a chain of calls went out from the Iron Riders Millhaven chapter that would, by the end of the afternoon, reach Hartwell and Clarksburg and carry an echo back from 2 other chapters who heard through the network and didn't wait to be invited. Hawkeye arrived first. His full name was Warren Hawk, 58 years old, built like a man who had spent 20 years as a Millhaven County Sheriff's deputy, the broad, unhurried build of someone who had learned how county buildings worked from the inside, the filing systems, the chain of authority, the particular way documents got buried when someone knew where to put them. He had left the department after a disagreement about how a case had been handled, a disagreement that still sat with him on certain nights in a way that had never found a satisfying name. He read the Walmart receipt without being told to read it. He said nothing for 20 seconds. Then, "How old is the filing restriction on the hail compensation claim?" 3 years, Colt said. "It should have cleared in 18 months, Hawkeye said. "Restricted processing pending review has a statutory limit." Gravel came 4 minutes later. His given name was Dwight Russ, 63 years old, a Gulf War combat medic who held a licensed EMT certification and kept a trauma kit bungee corded to his bike at all times. He did not say much when he arrived. He looked at Nora. He looked at her cracked knuckles raw at the joints, the newspaper stuffed into the toes of her oversized rain boots, the hollow circles under her eyes from 68 weeks of 5:45 alarms. He reached into his jacket and produced a pair of thermal gloves, one size too large for her grippy palm, the kind that actually worked in November. He set them on the card table without a word. She looked at them for a moment. Then she picked them up and put them on. That was the whole exchange. That was Gravel. Half-Track came 20 minutes later in a pickup with a dent in the rear fender that had been there long enough to become part of the truck's identity. His given name was Lester Dunn, 50 years old, 17 years as a high school guidance counselor before budget cuts made the decision for him. He understood the way a child learned to take up less space as a form of self-protection. He didn't make a production of his credentials. He filed away what he was observing, the deliberate stillness, the careful voice, the way she answered questions with exactly the information asked and nothing more. And he waited for the right moment. He said quietly to Colt, standing back from the card table, "She's going to need someone to talk to as much as she needs a headstone, possibly more." He didn't push it yet. He filed it the way careful people file things that matter. Rimfire was the youngest full member of the Mill Haven chapter at 33. His given name was Derek Voss. Lean and concentrated, the kind of still that meant he was processing several things at once. He had the business registry for Mill Haven County Beautification Partners, LLC, pulled up on his phone before Colt had finished explaining the situation. He looked at the registered agent's name. He looked at Hawkeye. He sent a screenshot without saying anything. Hawkeye looked at his phone and said, the LLC was registered the same quarter the Hale claim was denied. Then there was Brimstone, 70 years old, charter founder of the Iron Riders Mill Haven chapter, a full member since 1986. He had driven his truck to milepost 14 and parked behind Hawkeye's bike and walked over without explaining himself the way a man walks into a room he has always been welcome in. He read the Walmart receipt last after every other set of eyes had passed over it. He read it twice slowly, the way you read a document you expect to be asked about in a court of law. Then he set it on the hood of his truck and looked at Hawkeye. "This is a blood debt," Brimstone said, "and a crime." No one argued. Brimstone crouched down slowly, his knees registering their protest without stopping the motion, and he looked at Nora at eye level. His face had seen a great deal and absorbed it without being hardened by it. It was the face of someone who had chosen repeatedly over decades not to let what he'd seen close him. "Ray Hale's name is going in stone," he said. "That's the first thing. The second thing is that the man who made sure it couldn't get there is going to answer for what he did. And the third thing is that you don't have to carry this by yourself anymore. You understand?" She held his gaze, the lower lip between her teeth, then she nodded once. "Good," Brimstone said. He pushed himself back to standing. He looked at Colt. "Hawkeye has a name, former cemetery groundskeeper, 22 years in Section C. He's been keeping a log. And there's a woman, former county office aide. She said no to something she was asked to do and lost her position for it. She kept a copy." Colt walked back to where Nora was sitting after Brimstone had returned to the group at the truck. He sat down in the gravel beside her chair, not standing over her, sitting the way you sit when you are planning to stay for a while. "What do you do on the Saturdays it rains too hard?" he asked. She thought about it. "I still come," she said. "I just sit under the table." He nodded. He let it be what it was. "Your mom know where you go on Saturdays?" "She works doubles." A pause. She'd worry. He ran his thumb along a scar on his forearm, an older one from a different road on a different decade. He had a piece of his own he'd been carrying. He knew the only way to fully earn a child's trust was to offer something of yours first. Not reassurance, the real thing, something that cost you to say. "When I was about 12, he said, looking at the guardrail, there was a winter when nobody knew what to do with me. My dad was gone. My mom was working 2 jobs. I got shuffled around for about 2 years. Nobody was mean about it. There just wasn't anyone who made the specific decision that I was their responsibility. One man, his name was Roy Fenwick. He ran a hardware store. He let me work stock after school for a winter. That was it. One decision. But that decision was everything." He looked at the guardrail. "Your dad decided," he said. "Right here on this road." He looked at a burning motorcycle and made the decision that the man inside it was his responsibility. "I've been trying to figure out what I owe him ever since." Several seconds of quiet. "There's one more thing I didn't say," Nora said. He waited. The man on the phone. He said a name. Gerald. He said Gerald tried to go to the state in 2019 and nothing came of it. She looked up at Colt. "I think there was someone before us, someone who already tried to tell and it didn't work." Colt placed his hand gently on top of her head for a moment brief, and confirming then stood and walked back to Hawkeye and Brimstone. "She heard a name," he said. "Gerald. Pruitt told someone on the phone that Gerald tried to go to the state in 2019. Hawkeye was already nodding slowly. "Dorothy Crane," he said. "Former business partner. Co-owner of Pruitt's funeral home until 2019. Gerald would be her attorney. She left Millhaven 11 days after signing dissolution papers, filed a complaint with the Tennessee State Board. It was assigned a case number and never processed. Pruitt had a contact in the State Board's administrative staff." Brimstone picked up the Walmart receipt from the hood of his truck. "Dorothy Crane," he said, "was not the last. She was the proof of pattern." He looked around at the brothers assembled on the shoulder of Route 9 in a November drizzle. And a pattern is prosecutable. She did not know in that moment the specific shape of what had been done to her family. She knew the outline. She knew the numbers didn't work. $247 in the mason jar at home, $4,800 minimum for a headstone at the county-approved vendor, the $2,700 administrative processing fee that had appeared in a line item the very quarter after Calvary Baptist raised $412 for her family at their Easter collection, as if the county had seen the collection plate and responded accordingly. She had been 9 years old for 5 months. She was 9 years old the way some children are, 9 older than the number, more careful than 9, usually knows how to be carrying things no 9-year-old should have been given to carry. The green notebook in her kangaroo pocket was evidence of this. So was the receipt. So were the 68 Saturdays. She had understood without being told that showing up was a form of argument, that the world sometimes needed to be argued with on its own terms in the only language available. She had not told her mother about the county building visit. Her mother would have worried, and her mother was already carrying more than she should be carrying. She had not told her mother about the receipt because telling her mother would have made it real in a way that required her mother to decide what to do about it, and her mother was working 6 days a week and making decisions all day long. Nora had not wanted to add this one. She had been protecting her mother for 3 years, which is a long time to be 9. The afternoon light was thinning behind the cloud cover when Nora packed up her card table. The brothers were still at the hood of Brimstone's truck. Before she left, Colt came back one more time. He crouched beside her chair, which put him closer to her eye level. "We're going to go make some calls and put some things in order," he said. "I'll call you before next Saturday. And then you and your mom are going to come with us." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, plain a phone number handwritten in black marker. He set it on the card table. She picked it up. She held it in the thermal gloves. "Okay," she said. He stood. He looked at the bent guardrail one more time, the rust on it old and permanent. Then he walked back to his bike. The Iron Riders left the shoulder of Route 9 in a column, not fast, not slow, the pace of people who know where they are going. Their engines were a low, even sound, and then they were around the bend and the sound faded and the shoulder was quiet. Nora sat for a few minutes after they left. Then she packed everything and walked to the bus stop at Carver's Feed and Grain. The mason jar on the kitchen counter had $252 in it when she counted it that night. She sat at the kitchen table and ate the dinner her mother had left covered on the stove, and she took the laminated photo out of the kangaroo pocket and set it on the table in front of her face, up where she could see it without having to hold on. Her mother came home at 10:15, still in her work shoes. She found Nora at the kitchen table with the photo and the empty bowl. "You eat okay, baby?" Nora looked up at her. "Yes," she said. "Mom, something happened today." Her mother sat down, and Nora told her the important thing. A man had come to milepost 14 that morning, and he had a scar on his neck, and 3 years ago, Ray Hale had pulled him out of a burning motorcycle on that exact shoulder and the man had been going back there every Saturday looking for the name he couldn't find, and today he had found it. Her mother pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were closed. "He said Dad's name is going in stone," Nora said. "He said it like he meant it." Her mother was quiet for a long time. The kitchen was warm. The refrigerator hummed. The radiator ticked against the wall. "He always said," her mother whispered finally, "if you plant yourself somewhere long enough, the right person eventually comes." Nora looked at her mother. "I know," she said. "I was there every Saturday." Her mother looked at her for a long time. The look of a woman who is only now understanding the full weight of what her daughter has been carrying for 68 weeks. Not just the card table, not just the sign, the patience, the planning, the careful, solitary belief that if she kept showing up to the right place, eventually the world would show up back. She reached across the table and pressed her hand over Nora's. They sat like that for a while in the warm kitchen with the laminated photo between them. The Iron Covenant Clubhouse on Marker Road had a parking lot that could hold 40 bikes comfortably and 70 if people were willing to be considerate about it. By 7 on Sunday morning, it held 53. Millhaven. Chapter every road-capable member. By 8:15, the Hartwell chapter had arrived in a column of 29 riding in pairs, pulling into rows with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this together before. Clarksburg came last 19 strong, arriving at 8:44. When their engines cut in sequence, the silence had the particular quality of an indrawn breath held by a lot of people simultaneously. 101 motorcycles in the lot, and the overflow grass strip beside it, orderly. No raised voices. The rumble that had preceded them, heard 2 miles away, had settled into an expectant stillness that felt considerably more serious than noise. Colt stood at the hood of Brimstone's truck. He spoke for 6 minutes. No theater. No speeches about blood debt or brotherhood. Those had already been made on a highway shoulder the day before. He laid out 4 objectives in plain language. Document the fund diversion. Establish the LLC connection. Secure witness testimony before Pruitt had time to manage the narrative, and file the legal contest of the Section C, rezoning by Thursday at the latest. He assigned teams by skill. He named a point of contact for each. The last thing he said was, "We are guests of this county's legal process. We are here to support it, not replace it. Anyone who forgets that rides home." Not one person moved toward their bike. Loretta Sims had been waiting by her mailbox. She was 60 years old, plain-faced, a woman who looked like she had been rehearsing a conversation in her head for 3 years and was slightly terrified to finally have it. She had been driving her husband to a pre-dawn fishing spot the morning Ray Hale died. Route 9, milepost 14, 3 years ago in November. She had seen the semi pull over. She had seen the driver get out, a large man moving fast, no hesitation, and run toward the burning motorcycle on the shoulder. She had pulled her own car to the gravel 30 yards back because the fire was close to the road. She had watched Ray Hale pull a man from burning wreckage. She had watched the oncoming truck drift. She had screamed. She could still hear herself screaming. The county investigator came 2 days later, she told Hawkeye. Her hands were folded on her kitchen table, very still in the way of hands trying to behave. He asked if I saw what caused the accident. I told him what I told you. He wrote it down. I never heard from anyone after that. Not once. She paused. I kept thinking someone official was handling it, and that the family was going to be taken care of. She looked at her hands. I don't think that anymore. She had kept a contemporaneous account, a handwritten record dated sitting in a manila envelope in her hall closet because she had never known who to give it to. She gave it to Hawkeye. He held it the way you hold something that just closed a 3-year gap in a legal case. Earl Tatum had worked the Millhaven Municipal Cemetery for 22 years, the last 8 of them in Section C. He was 73, retired now for 18 months. He met Hawkeye and Rimfire at his front porch with a folder already in his hand. "I've been keeping notes," he said, "since I started noticing families getting turned away from the fund." He opened the folder. 8 families in 4 years. Not one successful compensation disbursement that he had seen reach a family. Not one. A fund that takes in allocation but never disperses. Where do you think the money goes? He had cross-referenced the disbursement inquiry log against the county's public posting of fund activity, which listed incoming allocation but no outgoing. The gap was observable to anyone who looked. No one in an official capacity had looked. The folder went into Hawkeye's saddlebag alongside Loretta's account. Margaret Boone had not wanted to meet in person. She had asked for a phone call first. Then Rimfire sent her a screenshot of the LLC registration, Millhaven County Beautification Partners, filed 4 years ago, nominee director, listed registered agent contact at 47 Denton Ridge Road, Dale Pruitt's home address, and she called back within 7 minutes and said she would meet wherever they wanted. She was 48, former county office administrative assistant. She had quit 2 years ago. "He asked me to backdate a letter," she said. The Hale family had filed their second appeal within the statutory window. He needed the denial letter to appear dated 4 days earlier to show the window had already closed when they filed. She exhaled. I said no. He said he understood. 3 weeks later, my position was reclassified as temporary, and I was given a 6-week notice. Another exhale. I kept a copy of the original letter, the one with the real date. I've had it in a filing box in my garage for 2 years. She had been waiting for someone to ask for it. "He didn't just steal money," Hawkeye said after Rimfire photographed the letter. "He stole their ability to appeal it. He backdated the clock and then told them the clock had run out. 3 pieces now. 3 accounts that had existed in complete isolation, a manila envelope, a handwritten log, a photocopied denial letter, never connected, never placed in the same room. In the same room, they formed a pattern that was impossible to look away from. Rimfire laid out the LLC financials on his laptop at the clubhouse that afternoon. Pruitt's fund account, 4 years. Incoming allocation every quarter, standard automatic from the county budget. Outgoing disbursements, 0 for the last 14 months. And before that, sporadic and never to a qualifying family. Every outgoing transfer routed to one destination, Millhaven County Beautification Partners, LLC. Reference code each time admin handling fee. He turned the laptop screen. The LLC doesn't do anything, he said. No contractors, no project records, no expenditure reports. It's a container. Money goes in. It doesn't come out the other side as anything observable. Layer 2. The LLC registration. Nominee director, a name that appeared nowhere else in county records. A paper person, but the registered agent contact was 47 Denton Ridge Road, Pruitt's home address, which meant he controlled the LLC directly. The nominee director was a shield, not a separation. Under Tennessee law, that was sufficient for a piercing the veil argument. The LLC didn't protect him. It implicated him. Layer 3. He pulled up a second window. Pruitt and Crane Funeral Services business operating account 2017 through 2019. 8 months of transfers out small at first and then larger. Total missing from the operating account over those 8 months, $154,000. He looked at the room. Dorothy Crane filed a complaint with the Tennessee State Board in February 2019. Assigned a case number. Never escalated. The intake administrator at the time was a former county employee under Pruitt's previous appointment. She left Millhaven 11 days after signing the dissolution papers. No forwarding address on file. Nobody spoke. The refrigerator behind the bar hummed. Every man in that room understood without saying it aloud that they were not looking at a commissioner who had made opportunistic choices. They were looking at someone who had built a system, who had done this before, who had practiced it and refined it and moved on, who had looked at Dorothy Crane and learned what he needed to learn and then looked at the Hale family and applied it. Brimstone was the first to speak. "How many families in the denial records?" 8, documented Rimfire said. "There may be more we don't have records for." There was a second person they needed to talk to, not Pruitt. His name was Marcus Tilden. Rimfire had found the name inside 20 minutes of the morning briefing. The man in the county polo shirt who had crouched to Nora's eye level on Route 9 the day before listened to her story, put his hand on her shoulder, said the words, "I'm going to make some calls today, sweetheart. This isn't right," and then got back in his car. His aide had texted Pruitt before they reached the on-ramp. 4 words: "Hale kid is back." Colt drove to Tilden's address alone. He knocked at 11 in the morning. Tilden answered in weekend clothes, with the look of someone who had been checking his phone every 15 minutes since the previous afternoon and was not surprised by who was at his door. Colt showed him 3 photographs on his phone: the LLC registration, the fund transfer record, a screenshot of the aide's text message to Pruitt obtained legally through a county communication records request Hawkeye had filed at 9 that morning. Then Colt said one sentence: "Tell me everything from the beginning, or I make one call and you answer to people with considerably less patience than I have." Tilden broke in under 5 minutes. He had known about the LLC for 7 months, not the full scope. He hadn't known about Dorothy Crane, hadn't known the number 8, hadn't known the backdated denial letter. But he had seen correspondence that referenced the beautification account in a context that made no sense for a beautification account. He had told himself it was above his level of authority. He had told himself someone else would catch it. He confirmed the text. He confirmed that he had received a forwarded copy of the LLC registration from Pruitt 2 years ago as part of a community development briefing. He confirmed that he had never followed up on it. This was the part that settled into Colt's chest like something cold and heavy, not Pruitt. Pruitt was legible. A man who had seen a system with loose supervision and a funding pool nobody was watching and had decided to use it predatory, deliberate, and in its own way comprehensible. This was harder. Marcus Tilden was not cruel. He coached youth basketball. He had volunteered at the county food bank twice last fall. He had apparently felt something real when he crouched down to Nora's eye level and put his hand on her shoulder. But between feeling something and doing something, there is a calculation most of us know how to make. The math of this would cost me something, and surely someone else will act before things get worse. Colt drove back to the clubhouse without saying much to anyone. The anger was not where he had expected to find it. He had expected to feel angrier at Pruitt. What he actually felt, the thing that sat in his chest for the rest of that morning, was the specific grief of the nearly. All the nearly stopped moments, all the mornings when one person in a position to notice had noticed and then carefully looked away. Dale Pruitt was cleaning the hull of his Ranger bass boat in his backyard when they arrived. Sunday morning. Marine sponge in one hand, hull cleaner in the other, old Millhaven Falcons polo khakis that had seen better days. The kind of outfit that said private, no one important coming by. He turned, and there were 4 of them at the fence gate, Colt, Hawkeye, Brimstone, and Rimfire, with the particular quality of stillness that means the people wearing it have already decided how this ends. Pruitt set down the sponge. His shoulders dropped. His hands came open, palms up. He tilted his head, the practiced quarter tilt of a man who had been approachable for 20 years and knew what approachability looked like from the outside. "Gentlemen, I don't believe we've been introduced. What can I do for you today?" The warmth in his voice was practiced but fluent. He name-dropped the county board chair inside 2 minutes, the county sheriff inside 3. He referenced his years of service. He said he was always glad to discuss family assistance programs with members of the community. He said his door was always open. He was very good. He had been good for 7 years. Colt let him finish. Then he asked one question. Who is Gerald and what happened when he tried to go to the state in 2019? 1 second, that was all it took. The shoulders didn't move, the smile stayed. But something behind Pruitt's eyes did a calculation, the rapid, involuntary arithmetic of a man who has just realized the conversation he thought he was managing is not the conversation actually taking place. Rimfire spoke next. Millhaven County Beautification Partners, LLC. Filed 4 years ago. 0 public expenditures. 4 years of fund allocation incoming and nothing dispersed to a single family in 14 months. He paused. Fiduciary duty. Mr. Pruitt, you had it over the Criminal Injury Compensation Fund, over every family whose application crossed your desk. When a county commissioner with administrative authority over a disbursement fund routes denied claims to a private LLC, he controls that is not mismanagement. Under Tennessee statute, that is embezzlement. Class B felony. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. Then the warmth came off. Underneath it was something cooler and more precise. You are on private property. I will be calling my attorney. And I will tell you now, if you are here suggesting any kind of impropriety in my office's management of county funds, you should know that I have a relationship with every person in the county legal structure who would be involved in any investigation. Any person. He let that sit. You want to pursue this, go right ahead. My attorney will bury your club in litigation before you get to the discovery phase. Brimstone had not moved from the gate. He had not spoken until this moment. The FBI received a referral this morning. Pruitt's face changed. The referral included the LLC registration, Earl Tatum's disbursement log, Margaret Boone's dated denial letter, and the transfer record from Millhaven County Bank showing $312,000 moved from the county fund to the LLC account 11 days after the Hale compensation claim was denied. He paused. You're welcome to call your attorney. I expect the FBI will want to speak with them. Pruitt was quiet for a long time. His expression was no longer performing warmth. It was no longer performing anything. It was the face of a man who has run his calculations and discovered for the first time in 7 years that the numbers don't come out in his favor. I have been under enormous stress, he said. His voice had dropped. The things you're describing, if they happened the way you're characterizing them, there were pressures on this office you don't understand. The county budget, structural deficits, decisions I had to make without adequate guidance. Colt said 8 words, quietly, final. I'm not interested in your reasons. Neither is she. Pruitt looked at the 4 men at his fence gate, and the performance stopped. Not because he chose to let it go, because there was nothing left underneath it to perform from. He asked once very quietly if someone could tell his neighbor about his mail. He was going to be gone for a while. He thought someone should know. 3 Millhaven County Sheriff's deputies arrived at 47 Denton Ridge Road at 12:43 in the afternoon. Hull cleaner residue on his left palm, cuffed with the unhurried efficiency of procedure. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who had gotten up that morning expecting a routine Sunday and been interrupted during it. That Colt thought watching from the gate is precisely the point. The arrest was the beginning. It was not the full picture. Rimfire found the folder in Pruitt's home office while the deputies were processing the scene. Under the search warrant, Hawkeye had helped a pro bono attorney draft. A locked filing cabinet bottom drawer. Pruitt's own copies organized, dated cross-referenced the records of a meticulous man. Under the Hale file. Under the file with the backdated denial letter. Under 3 others, Rimfire hadn't reached yet. A folder with a different color tab. Older. The paper inside had the specific yellow tone of documents sitting in a bottom drawer for 5 or 6 years. He picked it up. He read the top line. He said Hawkeye's name once. That was all. By Sunday afternoon, the full architecture of what Pruitt had built was visible. 8 families in 4 years. Total fund diversion, $312,000 from the Hale claim alone. an additional $76,000 across the other 7 denied families. $154,000 from Dorothy Crane's funeral home operating account, predating his commissioner tenure, establishing the pattern that made everything else prosecutable as a course of conduct rather than an isolated incident. Total stolen just over $500,000. Timeline of operation 7 years. The second name in Pruitt's locked filing cabinet belonged to a family in Clarksburg. A father who had died 2 years before Ray Hale in a different kind of accident on a different road. His wife had filed a compensation claim and received a denial, and then another denial, and then a denial on appeal, and had eventually moved out of Millhaven County entirely because she could no longer afford the rent. She had not known that her claim was valid. She had not known that the denial letters contained processing dates. Pruitt's office had adjusted to close the appeal windows before she could reach them. She had only known that the system had told her no, and she had run out of the particular kind of energy required to keep asking. Brimstone read that file alone at the clubhouse table that afternoon, after everyone else had moved on to other tasks. He read it the way you read something that confirms a thing you had already suspected and still hoped not to confirm. He did not say anything about it that afternoon. He set the file down and sat with it for a while. Then later, when Rimfire was compiling the full documentation for the federal referral, Brimstone told him to include every file in that bottom drawer. All of it. Every folder with every colored tab going back to the first one. A pattern he had said on Route 9 is prosecutable. He had not said a pattern is also a reckoning. But that was what was in the filing cabinet. Not just evidence of what Pruitt had done. The record of every family who had carried something they should never have had to carry because one man had looked at their grief and decided it was an opportunity. At 4:30 in the afternoon, a federal agent arrived at the Iron Covenant clubhouse. Her name was Agent Wren Cassidy. Plain clothes, practical, no performance of authority. She had the particular exhaustion of someone who had been working something for too long. She did not receive a warm welcome. She did not expect one. "I'm told you have material relevant to an open federal investigation," she said. "Depends on what you're investigating," Brimstone said. She said Pruitt's name and the name of the LLC. "How long has your office known about the fund diversion?" Colt asked. She held his gaze. "We've had the LLC registration flagged for 14 months. We've been building the financial trail through appropriate legal channels." 14 months. He let the numbers sit in the room. "We got a 9-year-old off a highway shoulder in 1 day." She had no good response to that. She knew she had no good response to that. The whole federal process, the appropriate channels, the careful documentation, the chain of custody requirements existed for real and important reasons. And it had still moved at a speed that would have let Ray Hale's grave get cleared in the spring, without a marker, without a name, without any of it ever being officially connected to the man who arranged it. She let the silence be what it was. Then she said, "You have something we don't." Rimfire placed the documents on the table one at a time. The LLC registration with Pruitt's home address. The fund transfer record. Margaret Boone's dated denial letter, the real date proving the Hale family's appeal window hadn't actually closed. Earl Tatum's 8-family disbursement log. Loretta Sims's contemporaneous account. Agent Cassidy reviewed each item. When she reached the disbursement log, she set her pen down, leaned forward slightly. Read it again. "The financial trail we had stopped at the LLC deposit level," she said. "We couldn't tie the denial letters to the transfer timing. This," she indicated the log and the denial letter together, "this gives us the full mechanism. Denial to diversion documented by 2 independent sources. This fills a gap we haven't been able to close." Brimstone stated the chapter's one condition before she could proceed. Nora Hale and her mother have a victim advocate assigned before any official interview. No one talks to that child without her asking for the conversation first. Cassidy nodded. "That's already standard protocol in a case involving a minor victim. I want it confirmed in writing before the interview is scheduled. You'll have it by tonight." She stood to leave. "Agent Cassidy." She turned. "You do right by her," Colt said. A beat. That's the job, she said. Half-Track made his own call that evening. He used the specific language that opens doors in school systems: grief-induced selective mutism specialist intervention within 90 days. Within the hour, he had a referral to a licensed child trauma therapist in Hartwell with an opening on Thursday. He called Sandra Hale at 8:45 Monday morning between her breakfast shift and her cleaning service hours. He introduced himself by name, not road name. He told her what had been found and what had been filed and what Dale Pruitt was now facing. He said it plainly without theater, because Sandra Hale was a woman who had been given false hope before and deserved real information delivered like an adult. She was quiet for a long time. "My daughter has been going to that highway every Saturday for a year and a half," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't know. She didn't want you to worry." Another silence. The specific silence of a mother learning the full weight of what her child had been carrying alone. "She's all right?" Sandra asked. "She's remarkable," Half-Track said, "and she's going to need some help processing what remarkable has cost her. That's what Thursday is for." Gravel drove them to Hartwell Thursday morning in his pickup, a paper bag of gas station snacks on the back seat, specific ones the kind a person buys when they've thought carefully about what a 9-year-old might actually want. He sat in the waiting room for the full hour of the session reading a hunting magazine without registering a single word of it. When Nora came out, she had the look of someone who has put down something they've been carrying for a very long time and whose arms aren't entirely sure what to do with the empty space. The therapist's name was Dr. Pauline Reese. She told Sandra afterward in the quiet way of a professional who had seen a great deal. She's been protecting everyone around her for 3 years. She's very good at it. Now she gets to practice not having to. The rezoning vote for Section C, Item 7B on the board's agenda was pulled from the monthly session by the acting commissioner before the end of Monday's business day. Section C would not be cleared. Ray Hale's plot remained exactly where it had been for 3 years. For now. There was a practical problem that needed solving, and the brothers understood this. Justice filed in a courthouse is one thing. A 9-year-old girl eating cereal alone for dinner 4 nights a week while her mother works a 6th day is a different category of problem, one that doesn't wait for court dates. The question of the headstone required solving on 2 fronts simultaneously. Hawkeye handled the first, the emergency injunction filed by the pro bono attorney on Tuesday, contesting the Section C rezoning and triggering a mandatory audit of the compensation fund contained as a subsidiary claim, a formal challenge to the $2,700 administrative processing fee that Pruitt's office had raised the quarter following Calvary Baptist's collection. Fee manipulation to obstruct access. Brimstone had used that exact phrase in his notes to the attorney. He had seen it done to veterans' families twice in the 90s, and he knew its legal name. The acting commissioner's office, operating now with full awareness that federal investigators were reading every document in the building, quietly restored the administrative fee to its pre-manipulation level of $340 by Wednesday afternoon. Rimfire handled the second front. He posted a single image to the chapter's social media account Tuesday evening. No names, no identifiable location details. Just a photograph of a folding card table with one short leg and a rain-laminated sign reading, "Lemonade $1 for Dad's Headstone," and 6 lines of plain text explaining what the sign meant and what was needed. By Thursday morning, contributions from 39 states had brought the total to $28,000. The Iron Riders tri-chapter response, Millhaven Hartwell and Clarksburg together, added $16,000 from chapter fundraising, a portion from the Millhaven chapter's own discretionary fund. The Hartwell chapter had taken a collection at their Sunday meeting without being asked. Clarksburg's road captain called Brimstone on Wednesday and said simply, "We're in. Tell us the number." The headstone vendor, the county approved one, the same vendor whose minimum had stood at $4,800, was contacted on Friday morning by a man who introduced himself as Colt and said he would like to discuss a custom inscription order and payment in full that day if that worked. If it worked. Nora was not told about the headstone until it was done. Colt had asked Sandra about this specifically. He wanted to know whether Nora should be involved in the design or whether she'd rather see it finished. Sandra had thought about it for a moment and said, "Show her something finished. She's been looking at something unfinished for 3 years." The design was Colt's idea, confirmed with Sandra, who pressed her hand to her mouth when she heard it and nodded. The inscription on the granite was taken from the back of the laminated school photo. Ray Hale's own handwriting rendered in the stone engraver's best approximation of a working man's marker script. "My girl, the whole reason. Dad." Below it, Ray Hale. "Route 9. He stopped. The headstone was installed on a Thursday morning in the Millhaven Municipal Cemetery Plot 23 Section C, while a light frost was still on the grass. Colt was there for the installation. He stood back while the crew worked and didn't say anything to anyone. When they were done and had packed their equipment and driven away, he stood in front of the stone alone for a while. He read the inscription twice. Then he called Sandra. "It's ready," he said. Charges were filed against Dale Pruitt on Tuesday morning in coordination with the federal investigation and the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office. Embezzlement of public funds, felony Class B, fraud against a government program, abuse of fiduciary duty, obstruction of the appeals process, the backdated denial letter scheme, 3 documented instances, conspiracy to defraud based on the documented communication with his contact at the Tennessee State Board. Bail was set at $450,000. Pruitt had a base boat registered in his wife's maiden name and a vacation property in Gatlinburg and a custom pickup in his garage. He had, as of Tuesday morning, frozen accounts pending the fraud investigation and a wife who had not returned to the house on Denton Ridge Road since Sunday. He sat in the Millhaven County Processing Center at a table with a cup of institutional coffee going cold in front of him and no charming explanation left. He had delivered Meals on Wheels on the second Tuesday of every month for 4 years. He had emceed the county fair ribbon cutting 2 years running. He had sat on the board of the county food bank and written a check for the children's reading program and attended more community events than any other commissioner in the district's history. He had done all of these things while running an embezzlement operation through a shell company. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who had gotten up on Sunday expecting a routine morning and been interrupted during it. And that more than anything in those files was the thing that was hard to sit with, because it meant that the ordinariness was not incidental. It was the mechanism. The approachability, the community presence, the warmth in the voice, these were not a cover for the crime. They were the crime's infrastructure. The system worked because no one who knew him thought to look, and no one thought to look because he was exactly the kind of person they had been trained to trust. The Callaways arrived at the Millhaven Municipal Cemetery at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday. Sandra and Nora, driven by Half-Track in the chapter's van, with enough space between the brothers standing in the parking lot to make it clear that this moment belonged to the family first. 23 iron riders in the lot, not 101. 23. The men who had been on Route 9 that first Saturday, and the handful who had asked quietly if they could come, and Brimstone, who was always where the important things happened without needing to announce it. They stood at a respectful distance near their bikes, not moving toward the grave. Just present in the way that presence offered correctly is its own form of tribute. Nora walked ahead of her mother. She was wearing the Peterbilt hoodie. Of course she was. The thermal gloves Gravel had given her were on her hands, still a size too large. She had the laminated photo against her sternum, as always held with her right hand. She walked through the gate and along the path through Section C toward the eastern tree line, and she walked with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who has been moving toward this for 3 years and is not in a hurry now that she is almost there. She stopped in front of the stone. She stood very still. She read the inscription once. She read it again, the lower lip between her teeth, the way it went when she was thinking carefully about something important. Then she reached out and pressed her palm flat against the granite. The specific gesture of a person confirming that something real exists, that it is solid, that it is not going to disappear when she stops looking at it. She kept her hand there for a long time. My girl, the whole reason, Dad. Her father's handwriting in stone. The specific character of a working man's marker script. The capital M slightly wider than it needed to be. The loop on the G open at the bottom. The period after Dad that he had put there because he was the kind of man who finished his sentences even in a note on the back of a photograph. Her palm was flat against the letters. Sandra put her hand on Nora's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The frost was gone from the grass now. The light was thin and November pale. Somewhere in the tree line at the cemetery's edge, a bird called once and went quiet. The smell of cold earth and oak leaves was in the air. The same smell as Route 9 2 miles north, the smell that had been her Saturday mornings for 68 weeks. Nora turned. She found Colt standing a few yards back, hands in his jacket pockets, giving her the room. She walked to him. She held out the laminated photo flat across both palms, the way you offer something precious. He took it. He looked at the little girl in the yellow dress. He turned it over and read the back, even though he already knew what it said. He handed it back. She tucked it against her sternum. He knew you, she said, not a question. He knew me for about 4 minutes, Colt said. That was enough for him. Nora looked at him steadily with those wide brown eyes, the eyes that had learned over 3 years to read decisions before they were spoken. It was enough for me too, she said. The first thing Sandra did when she came home that Thursday evening was sit at the kitchen table and eat dinner without watching the clock. She did not have a second shift to race to. She did not have a calculation to make about which bill could wait another week. The legal settlement process had been initiated. The pro bono attorney had filed for the full $312,000 owed under the original Good Samaritan claim, now fully documentable with the restored case file. It would take months, but the direction had reversed. The clock was no longer running against them. She sat at the kitchen table in their rental on Clemson Street and ate a meal she had had time to actually cook. Ground beef and onions, and the warmth of something made with enough time to make it right. Nora sat across from her and ate without watching the door, without eating fast, without the particular braced quality that comes from having lived for 3 years with the understanding that things can be taken away. She had 3 helpings. Sandra watched her daughter eat and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not relief exactly. Relief was what you felt when a threat passed. This was different. This was the specific aching tenderness of watching someone you love remember that they're allowed to take up space. She refilled Nora's bowl. After dinner, Nora sat at the table and took out the laminated photo. She set it on the table in front of her, face up, not holding it, just setting it there where she could see it without needing to hold on. Sandra saw it from the kitchen doorway. She leaned against the frame and didn't say a word. Colt drove past the Clemson Street rental on his way home that night. He hadn't planned to. He just took that road. The kitchen light was on. That was all he could see from the street, a rectangle of warm light in a window on a November evening. He pulled to the curb for a moment, sat with the engine idling. He thought about Roy Fenwick, the hardware store. The winter he had spent stocking shelves because one man had looked at a 12-year-old with nowhere to go and made one specific decision. Not a grand gesture, not a life commitment, just a season. Just the decision that one person was his responsibility. He thought about Ray Hale crouched on a highway shoulder, already helping with the oncoming truck in his peripheral vision, and the man in the wreckage not yet free. He thought about what it costs to be the person who decides. Then he pulled back onto the road and drove home in the dark. Dale Pruitt was convicted on 4 of the 5 charges filed against him. The conspiracy charge was reduced in plea negotiations. The federal prosecutors accepted the reduction in exchange for full cooperation, which included naming the contact at the Tennessee State Board whose inaction had protected him for years. That contact resigned. A formal review of all compensation claims denied under Pruitt's tenure was ordered. Of the 8 documented denied families, 6 were found to have valid outstanding claims. 1 had moved out of state and could not immediately be located. One was the family from Clarksburg, the wife who had stopped asking, and they were found, and they were contacted, and she did not believe it at first. She was 44 years old, working nights at a distribution center in a different county. She sat at her kitchen table when Hawkeye called her and was quiet for almost a full minute after he finished explaining. Then she said, "I stopped asking." Hawkeye said, "I know. You don't have to anymore." Pruitt was sentenced to 12 years in state prison with parole eligibility after serving 60%. He would be 62 at first eligibility. The base boat was seized. The Gatlinburg property was sold to partially satisfy the restitution order. The custom pickup sat in the impound lot for 3 months before it was auctioned. Marcus Tilden resigned from his counsel liaison position 4 days after giving his full statement to the federal investigators. He left no public explanation. Bethany Marsh, his aide, cooperated fully with the investigation and was not charged. She moved to Nashville the following spring. She had a card from Ray Hale's memorial service pinned to her refrigerator until the day she packed her apartment. She took it down carefully and put it in a box. She did not throw it away. 3 days after the headstone was installed, Nora went back to school. She sat in her 4th grade classroom and answered questions when called on, and her teacher, who had spent 7 months watching this child sit in complete deliberate silence, heard her voice in the classroom for the first time. It was low, measured, careful, but it was there. It was using the room. The school counselor updated Nora's file that afternoon. Selective mutism resolved. Recommend continuation of monthly check-ins. No clinical intervention required. She set the pen down after writing it. The way you pause when a sentence closes something that has been open for a long time. 3 months after Nora went back to school, the Millhaven County School District implemented a protocol requiring that any disclosure by a minor involving family financial hardship connected to a bereavement claim be referred to a social worker rather than classified as outside school scope. The protocol was named informally in the district's internal documentation after no one in particular but the counselor who helped draft it knew exactly whose disclosure it was written around. The legal settlement for the Hale family was finalized 8 months after the arrest. The full $312,000 owed under the original Good Samaritan claim was ordered dispersed. Sandra reduced her work schedule from 6 days to 4. She enrolled in an accounting certification program at the community college on track to finish in 14 months. The Iron Riders established a formal fund the month after the settlement. They called it the Route 9 Family Fund for families whose legitimate compensation claims were in legal dispute. The Hartwell chapter administered it. In the first year, it served 9 families. Colt kept a folder on his phone. He never labeled it anything sentimental. He kept screenshots in it, messages from strangers. A mother in Alabama whose son came home because a chapter in her state had started their own family fund after reading about the Hale case. A man in his 60s from Kentucky who wrote, "I read what those men did for that little girl, and I called my estranged daughter for the first time in 11 years. Thank you." A photograph from an anonymous sender, a headstone in a small Iowa cemetery, freshly installed a family standing around it in winter coats. He didn't respond to most of them. He read them. He put them in the folder. That was all. 6 months after the headstone was installed, Nora stood in front of her 4th grade class and gave a 2-minute report on the American Good Samaritan Act. She had asked to do it, not assigned. She had gone to her teacher and said, "I want to talk about what my dad did." She spoke for 2 minutes and 14 seconds without stopping. Her voice was low and measured, but it was there. It was present. It was using the room. When she sat back down, her teacher excused herself to the hallway for 90 seconds. On a Saturday in May, 16 months after the November morning at milepost 14, Colt took Route 9 south past Carver's Feed and Grain. He rode to milepost 14. He pulled over. He cut the engine. There was nothing at the shoulder now. No card table, no laminated sign, no small figure in an oversized hoodie standing in the cold. The guardrail was still bent rust and old steel, the evidence of 3 years ago that weather does not erase. A bird called from the tree line and went quiet. He sat for a few minutes, present not brooding, the way he had always sat here. The smell of coming spring was different from November, not diesel and wet concrete, but something opening. The particular scent of Tennessee pine when the temperature climbs past the point of frost. He reached inside his collar and found the burn scar on the left side of his neck. He had not fully understood in 3 years of Saturday mornings what he was doing here. He understood now. He was paying a debt in the only currency available when the person you owed was gone. Attention. Presence. Returning to the place where something that mattered had happened and refusing to let it become ordinary. Ray Hale had made a decision in approximately 4 seconds. He had looked at a burning motorcycle and a man inside it, and he had decided. He had not known who the man was. He had not calculated the odds. He had made the decision and crossed the shoulder and done the thing. That decision had cost him everything. And it had also, in the specific arithmetic of Route 9 and a lemonade stand and a Walmart receipt folded in thirds, changed everything. His daughter's name spoken in her own voice in front of her 4th grade class. His own words in granite. A fund named for a road he died on. 101 bikes on a Sunday morning. 23 men in a cemetery parking lot on a Thursday afternoon present without performing presence. That is what 4 seconds of deciding can build. Colt started the engine. He sat for one more moment. Then he pulled onto Route 9 and drove. 3 years after the headstone was installed, Nora Hale was 12 years old. She was taller. The hoodie had been retired to a shelf in her closet, still there, still folded, still with Dad written in black marker on the left sleeve in her handwriting. She had a new jacket that actually fit. She still carried the laminated photo, but in a small zippered pocket of her school bag, rather than pressed against her sternum, because some things can be carried differently once they have been given the room they needed. She still went to Section C sometimes. Not every week. The way you visit a place that matters to you rather than the way you haunt it. She went when she needed to think about something important. She went when she wanted to tell her father something. She went sometimes for no reason she could articulate, other than that it was a place where she felt less alone. One Wednesday afternoon in October, she was sitting on the low stone wall outside the cemetery office when she saw a girl she didn't know sitting near the main gate, knees pulled up, a piece of paper in her hand. The girl was maybe 13 or 14, and she had the particular look that Nora recognized from 12 feet away, the held-in quality, the exhaustion behind the eyes of someone who has been told no enough times to stop expecting yes, but hasn't quite given up yet. Nora recognized it because she had worn it herself. She crossed the grass to where the girl was sitting. She sat down beside her. Not too close. The right distance. "Who are you looking for?" she asked. The girl told her. It was a name the county records office had told her twice was not in the accessible files. Nora took out her phone. She made a call, not to the county office, not to a hotline, to Hawkeye, who answered on the second ring and listened for 30 seconds without interrupting and said, "Give me the name. I'll have a record search done by end of day." She handed the phone to the girl. She watched the girl's face change, the specific change of a person who has just been handed something they had stopped believing existed. Someone who was going to do something about it. Nora had worn that face once. She knew what it felt like from the inside, the combination of terror and hope and exhaustion. The face of someone who has been failed enough times to stop expecting anything but hasn't quite given up yet. She had not walked past. She had not done the math about whether this was her specific problem to address. She had crossed the grass. That was the decision. The same one made again by a different person in a different October at a different low stone wall. The same decision Ray Hale had made on a highway shoulder on a November morning. The same decision Colt Mercer had made when he climbed off his bike and walked toward a card table with a laminated sign. The decision doesn't look the same every time. Sometimes it is 4 seconds on a highway shoulder. Sometimes it is 68 Saturdays of showing up. Sometimes it is climbing off a bike and walking across the gravel and asking 4 words. Sometimes it is as small as crossing a cemetery lawn and sitting down next to someone and saying, "Who are you looking for?" But it is always the same decision at its core, the decision to be the person who stops. Nora called Colt the following Saturday, standing about 20 feet from her father's headstone. He answered on the second ring. She described it, the girl at the gate, the piece of paper, the look she recognized. She described crossing the grass. She described the call to Hawkeye. She said, "I didn't know what else to do, so I did what you did." He was quiet for a moment. "You did exactly what I did," he said. She said, "Is it always going to feel like that, scary and right at the same time?" He thought about this. "Yeah," he said, "pretty much. But you get better at letting the right part win." She was quiet for a moment. She was looking at the headstone. She said, "My dad wasn't scared." He said, "You sure about that?" She thought about it. "No," she said slowly. "Actually, no, he probably was." "He probably was," Colt said. "He just didn't let it stop him." Another silence. "Okay," she said. The same word she had said on Route 9 in the gravel on the morning this had begun. The word that had sounded like one thing that day and sounded like something slightly different now, not permission to believe, but confirmation of understanding. She hung up. He sat in his kitchen for a while after the call ended. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't reheat it. He thought about something Half-Track had said once, in the weeks after the settlement, when they were talking about the families the Route 9 Fund had served in its first year. He had said the thing about doing right by one person is that it almost never stops at one person. It branches. It always branches. You just can't see the branches from where you're standing when you decide to act. Colt had thought about that. He thought about it again now. 9 families in the documentation. 6 with valid outstanding claims. The woman in Clarksburg who had stopped asking and gotten her answer anyway. The family in Iowa with the photograph in his phone folder. The mother in Alabama. The man in Kentucky and his estranged daughter. None of them reached by design. All of them reached because one 9-year-old girl had decided that showing up to the right place 68 times was enough, and one man had finally stopped, and what followed from those 2 decisions had branched in ways neither of them could have predicted from the gravel of Route 9 in a November drizzle. He finished the cold coffee. He put the cup in the sink. He had a monthly meeting to get to. The Iron Riders had their meeting the second Sunday of every month, and Brimstone had asked him to say a few words about the Route 9 Fund to the chapter. Not a presentation, just a few words about how it was working and what it was for, because Brimstone believed that the things a chapter did needed to be spoken aloud regularly, or they became bureaucracy instead of purpose. He sat at the table with the men he had ridden with for 20 years, and he said a few words. He said the fund served 9 families in its first year. 6 of them had claims that had been improperly denied. 3 of them had given up on those claims before we found them. He said every one of them had been doing what Nora Hale did. They had been showing up to the right place and trusting that the right person would eventually come. Some of them had been doing it for years. Some of them had stopped. He said, "The only difference between the ones who got their claims reviewed and the ones who didn't is whether someone showed up and asked the question. That's all the fund is. It's the question asked with enough resources to back it up." Brimstone nodded once from the end of the table. He drove home that evening on Route 9. Not the bypass. Route 9. Past Carver's Feed and Grain, past milepost 14, past the bent guardrail with the rust on it. He did not slow down this time. He did not stop. He rode past at highway speed the way someone rides past a place they know well, the way you pass something that has become familiar enough that you no longer need to stop in order to see it clearly. The road curved south. The timber lots fell away on either side. The sky was the particular shade of blue that only November evenings carry, the blue that holds the specific cold of the season in its color. He thought about Roy Fenwick one more time. The hardware store. The winter. The one decision. He thought about what Roy Fenwick probably never knew, that the 12-year-old he had given a winter to would grow into a man who would ride a particular road for 3 years to honor a debt he couldn't name, and would one day find the name waiting for him at a card table with a laminated sign, and would set in motion a chain of events that would give 8 families back what had been taken from them, and would inspire a fund that served 9 more families in its first year, and would teach a 12-year-old girl in Tennessee to cross the grass when someone needed someone to cross the grass. Roy Fenwick probably never knew any of that. He probably just knew that a 12-year-old needed a winter, and he had one to spare, and he gave it. That was the whole decision. Everything else was the branch. This story is not really about bikers or patches or a county commissioner who made choices he thought were invisible. It is about what happens to the people we don't see. The ones who are right in front of us, at a lemonade stand, on a highway shoulder, in a hallway, on a bench, at a cemetery gate, with a piece of paper in their hand. The ones who have been trying in the only language available to them to tell us something we needed to hear. If you have ever driven past someone who needed something from you, and you knew it, and you kept driving, you know the specific feeling of that arithmetic. You know how easy it is to make. And you probably know, if you are honest with yourself, that it stays with you, that it sits in the way things sit when they are unresolved. Here is what Nora Hale's story says to that feeling. It is not too late to cross the grass. It is not too late to ask the name. It is not too late to say to someone, to anyone, I see you, I'm not driving past. You do not need 101 motorcycles to do that. You need what Colt Mercer had on a November morning on the shoulder of Route 9. The willingness to cut the engine, to look at the bent guardrail for a moment, to look at the small girl behind the card table and understand that she has been waiting for the person who would stop. Pay attention to the people around you. Listen when a child hesitates. Ask the question the room is waiting for someone to ask. Care enough to intervene, especially when your voice shakes. There are Nora Hales everywhere, standing in the drizzle, holding something precious against their chest, showing up to the same place again and again, because they believe with the stubborn and exhausted and entirely rational faith of someone who has run out of other options, that if they keep showing up, eventually the right person will come. Be the right person. On the shoulder of Route 9 in Millhaven, Tennessee, at milepost 14, south of Carver's Feed and Grain, there is a bent guardrail with rust on it. The rust is old and permanent. The guardrail was bent on a November morning 3 years before this story began, and it has never been fully straightened because the cost of straightening it was never in any maintenance budget, and because the people who knew what it meant had more important things to do than straighten it. It is still there. The diesel smell and the pine smell and the cold asphalt smell are still there on Saturday mornings. And the particular sweetness of powdered lemonade on cold air, a ghost of it, the way smells outlast the things that made them, is still there if you stop and pay attention. And the little girl in the oversized Peterbilt hoodie is somewhere else today. She is somewhere warm. She has her father's name in granite and her own voice back, and 68 Saturdays that were never wasted, not one of them, because they led to the morning when the right person finally cut his engine and climbed off his bike and walked across the gravel and asked 4 words. What was his name? My girl. The whole reason. Dad. He knew. And now because a 9-year-old girl refused to stop showing up, so does everyone else. There is something that needs to be said about the 68 Saturdays before the 68th one, because the story did not begin with Colt Mercer cutting his engine on a gravel shoulder. It began much earlier in the particular way important things always begin, not with a dramatic moment, but with a quiet decision made on an unremarkable morning in the kitchen of a rental house on Clemson Street. The first Saturday had been 6 weeks after the funeral. Nora's mother had not known about it until the second Saturday, when she had come home from her shift to find the mason jar on the kitchen counter with $11.40 in it, and a note that said for Dad's headstone in Nora's handwriting. Sandra had sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the jar for a long time without saying anything. Then she had gone to Nora's room and found her already asleep, still in her coat, the Peterbilt hoodie worn over it, the laminated photo still in the kangaroo pocket. She had not stopped her. She had understood in the specific wordless way that mothers understand things about their children that they could not explain if asked to explain, that stopping her would cost more than allowing it, that the card table was not a fundraising strategy, that the 68 Saturdays were not about reaching $4,800. They were about having a place to go, a place where she could be doing something rather than not doing something, a place where the waiting had a shape. Sandra had been doing her own waiting, 6 days a week of it in the specific gray of double shifts and bills due, and the particular loneliness of a woman who has lost the person who made the ordinary bearable. She had her own ways of getting through. She had not talked about them because talking about them would have made them real in a way that required other people to respond, and she was too tired for other people to respond. She and Nora were alike that way. Neither of them had told the other the full weight of what they were carrying. They had been carrying it side by side for 3 years in the same house, eating meals at the same kitchen table, and the weight had been invisible to each of them because each was working so hard not to show the other how heavy it was. This is the thing about a family that has lost something enormous. The love becomes the hiding place. You hide what you're carrying inside the love because you don't want the person you love to know how much you're struggling, and they are doing the same thing. And you sit across from each other at a kitchen table for 3 years in the warm and quiet and entirely parallel aloneness of two people who care too much about each other to be honest about how hard things are. Colt had understood this about Nora from the gravel of Route 9 before she said anything about the receipt or Gerald or the county building. He had understood it from the way she answered his question about what she did when it rained too hard. "I still come," she had said. "I just sit under the table." And in those 11 words was the complete picture of a child who had decided that showing up mattered more than results, who had built the showing up into a ritual precise enough to survive the days when nothing came of it. That was not a 9-year-old's strategy. That was a person's strategy, a person who had encountered grief young enough that the usual human tools for managing it, distraction, avoidance, the ordinary consolations had not yet been available and had therefore developed something sturdier in their place. Stubbornness, you could call it, patience, or simply the refusal to let absence have the last word. She had been writing her father's name on her sleeve every Saturday for 68 weeks. Not a memorial, not a performance, a fact. The way you write a fact, you need to keep visible. He was real. He had been here. He had mattered in the specific, concrete, irreplaceable way that a person matters when they are the one who takes your point seriously and argues for the folded grocery bag over the Marlboro box. He was real, and she was going to keep showing up to the place where he had been real until the world acknowledged it in stone. The second thing that needs to be said is about the men who came to Route 9 on that first Sunday, because the story did them a disservice in not showing what it had cost each of them to become the kind of men who showed up. Hawkeye had left the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department after 15 years because of a case involving a compensation fund, not the Hale Fund, a different one, smaller municipal, managed by a man who had since retired comfortably to a lake house outside Chattanooga. Hawkeye had filed an internal report. The report had been reviewed. The review had concluded that the discrepancies identified were within acceptable administrative variance. Hawkeye had gone home that evening and sat in his kitchen and made the specific calculation that a man makes when he has decided that staying is more expensive than leaving. He had left the following Monday. He had not filed an external complaint. He had told himself that someone else would catch it eventually. He had been telling himself that for 11 years. Reading the Walmart receipt on the shoulder of Route 9 had the particular quality for Hawkeye of a thing long overdue arriving without announcement. Not surprise. Recognition. The specific weight of a person who has been waiting without knowing they were waiting for the moment when the thing they didn't finish would offer itself to be finished. He worked through Sunday with a focused efficiency that some of the younger chapter members found slightly frightening. He was not frightening. He was simply a man paying a debt he had been carrying for 11 years, and the payment of it had a specific shape, and he intended to follow that shape exactly. Gravel had been in Gulf War. He had held people together in situations that did not have good outcomes, and some that did, and he had learned over those years the particular skill of presence without commentary, being with someone in a difficult moment without filling the moment with words that were really about his own need to feel useful. He had given Nora the thermal gloves because she needed them, and because offering them was the correct thing to do, and because he did not need her to say thank you or even look at him when she put them on. The transaction was complete when the gloves were on her hands. That was all. He had sat in the waiting room at the therapist's office in Hartwell for 60 minutes, reading a hunting magazine he had read twice before and would read a third time if necessary, because what Nora needed in that waiting room was not conversation or reassurance or the presence of someone watching for how she was doing. What she needed was a person who was simply there in the undemanding way of someone who has nowhere else to be and no opinion about how long anything takes. He was very good at that. He had learned it in conditions that had not been ideal for learning. Half-Track had spent 17 years sitting with children in distress in an institutional context. The counselor's office, the mandatory check-in, the required session after the incident, and had come to understand that the institutional context itself was frequently the problem. That the thing a child in distress needed most was not a session, but a person. Not a protocol, but a presence. Not a referral, but someone who stayed. Budget cuts had removed him from the school system at 50, and he had thought for about 6 months that he was done with that work. Then Brimstone had invited him on a ride to a fundraiser for a family whose father had been killed in an industrial accident, and he had watched the chapter sit with the family the way the chapter knew how to sit with people, not performing comfort, not managing the situation, just present in a circle for as long as they were needed, and he had understood that this was the same work, the same human skill, just without the office and the mandatory paperwork. He had been with the Iron Riders for 9 years. He had sat with many families. He had never sat with one quite like this one, a 9-year-old, who had been doing the adult work of grief management for 3 years because the adults around her had been too overwhelmed by their own versions of it. The referral to Dr. Reese was the most important thing he had done in those 11 days. Not the LLC research, not the legal filings, not the 101 bikes in the parking lot on Sunday morning. Those were justice. The referral was care. And care and justice are not the same thing even when they are both necessary and confusing. Them costs people. Rimfire was the youngest of them, and the one who spent the least time sitting with things and the most time moving through them. He was 33 years old, and he had grown up in a county not unlike Millhaven County, with a compensation fund, not unlike Millhaven's compensation fund, with a family that had filed a claim for his father's death in a workplace accident and received a denial and never had the language or the access to understand why. He had been 11 years old. He was not 11 years old anymore. He had built the language and the access carefully and deliberately over 20 years for exactly the kind of situation he had encountered on Route 9. He did not talk about this, not in detail. Brimstone knew because Brimstone knew things about his chapter members that didn't require being told. But Rimfire had not narrated it or used it as a credential or brought it up in the conversation about the Hale family. He had simply worked at the speed and with the precision of someone for whom the work was not abstract. That was what the Iron Riders were collectively, not a club in the casual sense of the word, not an organization with a mission statement. A group of people who had each in their different ways accumulated the specific costs that life in a county like Millhaven could accumulate over a lifetime, and who had decided that the accumulated cost was best paid forward rather than hoarded. Men who had been the 12-year-old with nowhere to go. Men who had filed the report that went nowhere. men who had held people together in situations without good outcomes, men who had said no to one falsified document and paid for it with a career, all of them carrying the specific weight that comes from having been at the wrong end of the calculation someone else made about whether their problem was worth addressing. They knew what that calculation felt like from the inside. They knew what Nora Hale was carrying because they had carried versions of it themselves, and they had spent years building the skills and the relationships and the specific practical competencies that would make them useful to someone in her situation. Roy Fenwick had given Colt a winter. Every one of those men had received at some point their own version of that winter. A person who had crossed the grass when they needed someone to cross the grass. They were paying it forward with compound interest. The third thing that needs to be said is about Dale Pruitt, not in his defense, and not to complicate the judgment of what he did, but because the story would be incomplete without it. Dale Pruitt was not born cynical. He had started in county administration 20 years ago with the specific kind of genuine enthusiasm that comes from being the first person in your family to hold a position of institutional power. He had believed at the start that the county compensation fund was exactly what it was supposed to be. He had processed the first dozen claims with care. He had felt something when a family received their disbursement. He had felt something. Somewhere in the space between the first dozen claims and the construction of Millhaven County Beautification Partners, LLC, the feeling had been replaced by the calculation. Not suddenly, gradually. The way water finds a crack in a foundation, not with violence, but with patience and the indifferent pressure of accumulated time. He had told himself at the first redirection of funds that it was temporary, that the county budget was genuinely strained and that he would replace it. He had told himself that for 7 years. The replacement had never happened, and at some point he could not have said precisely when the intention to replace it had stopped being an active intention and had become simply the story he told himself so that the calculation remained manageable. He had delivered Meals on Wheels every second Tuesday for 4 years. He had felt something doing that too. He had liked the feeling of being the person who showed up, the person who cared, the person whose name the recipients knew and were glad to hear. He had not examined whether the man who showed up with hot meals and the man who redirected grieving families' compensation funds were the same man. He had kept them in separate rooms of himself and had been very careful about the door between the rooms. This is not an excuse, it is the mechanism. Understanding the mechanism is not the same as forgiving it. But a story that leaves the mechanism out fails the people who need to recognize it, who need to see, not just that a bad thing was done by a bad person, but that the calculation is available to all of us, and that the difference between the person who makes it and the person who doesn't is not innate goodness, but a series of much smaller choices made much earlier in ordinary moments about whether to stay in the room with a difficult truth or find a way to step around it. The 9 families in Pruitt's filing cabinet had been the result of someone stepping around it. The bent guardrail on Route 9 had been the result of someone refusing to. This is the distance between those two things. It is not a comfortable distance. It is not supposed to be. The settlement check for Sandra Hale arrived on a Tuesday in September, 8 months after the arrest. She opened the envelope at the kitchen table alone in the quiet of the house before Nora came home from school. She had been expecting it, the attorney had told her the approximate timing, but the expectation did not prepare her for the weight of it. Not the amount, though. The amount was real and consequential and would change the shape of their lives in practical ways she had already begun to carefully plan. The weight was something else. It was the weight of a thing finally set right after 3 years of being wrong. She sat with the check for a long time before she did anything with it. She thought about Ray. She thought about the morning she had gotten the call. She thought about the 3 years of doubles and budget calculations and 6-day weeks and the specific exhaustion of a woman who has been running towards something she cannot quite reach because someone has been quietly moving it further away. She thought about her daughter on a highway shoulder in February in boots stuffed with newspaper. She thought about the mason jar. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the months after the arrest, in the long private way of someone processing a grief that has been deferred for too long. She had done it carefully and thoroughly, and with Dr. Reese's guidance, in the specific structured way of a person who has finally been given permission to stop holding everything together. She was not crying now. She was just sitting with the weight of it and letting the weight be what it was. Then she took the check to the bank. And on the way home, she stopped at Carver's Feed and Grain, not for any particular reason, just because it was on the way, and she bought a bag of the powdered lemonade that Nora had used every Saturday for 68 weeks. The specific brand, the yellow canister with the yellow label. She brought it home and set it on the kitchen counter next to the mason jar, which still had $252 in it. She left them both there. She did not explain them to Nora when Nora came home. Some things explained themselves. Nora looked at the canister and the mason jar for a moment when she came in. She set her school bag down. She looked at her mother. "Is it done?" she asked. Sandra said yes. Nora looked at the mason jar again. Then she looked at the canister. Then she sat down at the kitchen table. "I'm hungry," she said. Sandra laughed. It came out of her unexpectedly, and completely the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with something being funny, and everything to do with something being released. She laughed for about 15 seconds, while Nora watched her with the patient, slightly concerned expression of a child who understands that adults sometimes need a minute. Then Sandra went to the kitchen and started dinner. Nora sat at the kitchen table and did her homework. The mason jar was on the counter beside the yellow lemonade canister. The kitchen smelled of something warm. Later that evening after dinner, Nora called Colt. She told him about the settlement. She told him about the check arriving. She told him what her mother had done at Carver's Feed and Grain. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. She said, "Colt." "Yeah." She said, "Do you still go to Route 9 on Saturdays?" He thought about it. "Sometimes," he said. "Not every week anymore. Sometimes." She said, "Me too." Another silence. The particular quality of two people sitting comfortably with the specific understanding they had come to, which was not the understanding of friends exactly, and not of family exactly, but of something in between two people whose lives had been intersected by the decision of a third person, and who had therefore become in some permanent and unasked-for way responsible to each other. She said, "My dad would have liked you." He considered this. He thought about Roy Fenwick and the hardware store and the winter that had changed everything. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of man that a man like Ray Hale would have liked. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think I would have liked him too." She said good night. He sat with his cold coffee and thought about the branch. All the branches, the ones he could see and the ones he couldn't. Somewhere in Alabama, a mother and her son were on speaking terms because a chapter in her state had started a fund. Somewhere in Kentucky, a man had called his daughter. Somewhere in Iowa, a family stood around a headstone in winter coats. Somewhere in Millhaven, a 12-year-old girl had crossed a cemetery lawn and sat down next to a stranger and asked, "Who are you looking for?" And somewhere on a shelf in a closet on Clemson Street, a Peterbilt hoodie was folded with "Dad" written in black marker on the left sleeve, worn enough at the elbows that the fabric had gone soft, carrying the specific smell of 68 Saturday mornings and the ghost of powdered lemonade on cold air. The whole reason. He started the engine. He pulled onto the road. He drove home in the dark. Pay attention to the people around you. Listen when a child hesitates. Ask the question the room is waiting for someone to ask. Care enough to intervene, especially when your voice shakes, especially then. There are Nora Hales everywhere, holding something precious against their chest, showing up to the same place again and again because they believe with the stubborn and exhausted and entirely rational faith of someone who has run out of other options that if they keep showing up, eventually the right person will come. Be the right person. Cut the engine. Cross the grass. Ask the 4 words. What was his name? My girl. The whole reason. Dad. He knew. And now because a 9-year-old girl refused to stop showing up, so does everyone else. The week after the settlement arrived was the week that Sandra Hale began to sleep through the night for the first time in 3 years. She had not known until the first morning she woke at 6:30 naturally and lay in the quiet and felt the absence of the weight, how comprehensively the weight had lived in her body. Not just in her mind, in her shoulders and her jaw, and the specific tension across her lower back that she had attributed for 3 years to the physical demands of waitressing and cleaning work. She had attributed it to the work because attributing it to the grief would have required her to sit with the grief, and she had not had the time or the space to sit with it. She had 12 more sessions booked with Dr. Reese. She had made the appointments not because Half-Track had suggested it, but because she had sat in the waiting room while Nora was in her first session and had looked at the wall of a therapist's office for 45 minutes and understood that the waiting room was a place she needed to be in, not just waiting for. She had called Dr. Reese the following week. Dr. Reese had an opening on Mondays. Sandra had rearranged her schedule to take it. She went to the first session and sat in the chair across from Dr. Reese and said without preamble, "My husband died 3 years ago, and I've been running ever since, and I need to learn how to stop." Dr. Reese had said, "That's a very clear way to put it." Sandra had said, "I have a daughter who had to be clearer than most 9-year-olds because her mother was too busy running to be available. That teaches you to say things clearly." Dr. Reese had written something down. Then she had said, "Your daughter is also my patient, so I can't discuss her progress with you. But I can tell you that the clearest thing I've seen in my practice in a long time is the fact that you're here." Sandra had thought about that on the drive home. The fact that she was there, the fact that she had made the appointment and kept it and driven herself to an office in Hartwell on a Monday morning and sat down in a chair and said the true thing. Ray had always said that the hardest part of anything was getting started. Once you were in motion, the motion carried you. The problem was the static, the part before you moved, when the reasons not to were louder than the reasons to. She was in motion now. The settlement money had made the motion financially possible in a way it hadn't been when she was working 6 days a week to keep the rent paid. But the motion itself had begun earlier. The motion had begun when Nora had come home from Route 9 on the 68th Saturday and said, "Mom, something happened today." That was when Sandra had stopped running and turned around. The following spring, 8 months after the headstone was installed, Nora turned 10. Sandra baked a cake. Not from a mix from scratch, the chocolate cake with the cream cheese frosting that Ray had requested for every birthday of his adult life, and that Sandra had made exactly once since he died on the first birthday after, and had not been able to finish because the smell of it had been so specific and so present that she had stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward just breathing. She had made it again for Nora's 10th birthday. This time she had stood in the kitchen breathing the smell and felt something that was not only grief. It was also the very specific warmth of a person who is standing in the continuation of something, who is carrying something forward. She had made the cake and frosted it and set it on the kitchen table and lit the candles and watched her daughter blow them out. Nora had made one wish. She had not said what it was because wishes said aloud don't come true, and she was still at an age where she treated this rule seriously. She had pressed her lips together and blown, and all 10 candles had gone out on the first try, and she had looked up at Sandra with the particular look of someone who has just confirmed that the world is, at least for this moment, cooperative. "What did you wish for?" Sandra had asked because she always asked, even though she knew Nora would never say. Nora had looked at the extinguished candles. She had thought about it with the lower lip between her teeth. "I already have it," she said, "so it doesn't count." Sandra had cut the cake without asking her to explain that. Some things explained themselves. Colt called on Nora's birthday. He had gotten the date from Sandra, who had mentioned it in passing in one of the updates she had begun giving him periodically. Not formal, not scheduled, just occasional calls in which she told him how Nora was doing because he had asked once and she had understood that the asking was not a courtesy but a genuine need to know, and she had trusted the need. He said, "Happy birthday, kid." She said, "How did you know?" He said, "Your mom told me." She considered this. She said, "She likes you." He said, "I like her too. She raised you right." A silence. The particular silence of a 10-year-old deciding whether to accept a compliment or deflect it. She accepted it. "I know," she said simply. He laughed. It was a short laugh, startled out of him, the kind that comes when someone says the exact right thing in the exact right way, and you were not prepared for it. She had that quality, she had always had that quality of saying the true thing without decoration. Her father had had it too. Colt had not known Ray Hale, but he had known him for 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes, the only language available had been action, and the action had said everything. A man who sees the burning thing and decides without calculation, who moves toward it, who does not stop to consider whether the odds are in his favor or what it will cost him or whether someone else might handle it, who simply decides because deciding is what the moment requires. The 10-year-old on the other end of the phone had inherited that quality without knowing it was inherited. She had been demonstrating it for 68 Saturdays before Colt arrived to witness it. She had demonstrated it again at the cemetery gate when she sat down next to a stranger and asked who she was looking for. She would demonstrate it again in different forms over the years that followed, because it was in her the way the fold at the bottom of the G was in Ray's handwriting, structural, not decorative, the mark of the person underneath the surface. He said, "Have a good birthday, Nora." She said, "Thanks, Colt." She hung up. She went back to the kitchen table where Sandra was cutting a second slice. The Iron Riders held a chapter ride every spring to raise money for the Route 9 Family Fund. The first one was held 11 months after the arrest. The route took them through Millhaven south on Route 9 past Carver's Feed and Grain, past milepost 14, and continued south to Hartwell and back. 42 bikes in the column. Weather clear and cold in that specific way of early Tennessee spring when the sky is blue enough to seem artificial and the air still carries the last memory of winter. Nora and Sandra stood at Carver's Feed and Grain to watch them pass. Sandra had her hand on Nora's shoulder. Nora had both hands in the pockets of a jacket that actually fit. No card table, no laminated sign, no mason jar. She watched the column pass. She watched Colt near the front riding in the specific way he rode, not fast, not slow, settled in the saddle, the way a person rides a road they know well. He raised 2 fingers off the handlebars when he passed her, the small salute of someone who has no need to make a production of the acknowledgement. She raised 2 fingers back. The sound of the column passed the deep, even engine sound of 42 motorcycles in formation, and then they were around the bend and the sound faded and she could hear the ordinary sounds of Route 9 again, the birds in the timber lots, the occasional car, the wind in the oaks. She stood there for a moment in the quiet that followed. Her father had driven this road every week for 4 years out of Millhaven. He had known this stretch the way she had come to know it, the specific quality of the morning light, the smell of the timber lots in different seasons, the sound of the guardrail when the wind came from the south. He had driven it in his semi with his thermos on the console and his radio on some country station, and his particular quality of unhurried attention, the quality of a man who did not need the road to be anything other than what it was. She did not know this about him as memory. She had been 5 years old the last time she had been in his truck. She knew it as information from her mother, from the Peterbilt employees at the memorial service, from the things she had written down in her green notebook over 68 Saturdays of reconstructing him from the available evidence. But sometimes, standing on this shoulder, with the November smell or the spring smell in the air, she felt something that was not quite memory, but was not quite imagination either. A kind of presence, the feeling of a person who has been so completely in a place that they leave something there, an imprint of their attention that other people can sometimes sense if they are paying close enough attention themselves. She did not tell anyone about this. It would have sounded strange, and she was a practical person who preferred concrete language, and she did not have concrete language for it. She only knew that standing on the shoulder of Route 9 at milepost 14 was different from standing anywhere else, and that the difference was not only grief and not only memory, but something in addition to both. She put her hands back in her pockets. "Come on," Sandra said. They walked back to the car. The spring ride became an annual event. The second one had 57 bikes. The third had 63. By the fourth year, families from 3 of the 9 families served by the Route 9 Family Fund had joined the gathering, not riding most of them, but standing along the route to watch the column pass, the way people stand along a parade route, not to see a spectacle, but to be present for something that matters. The fund itself had, by the fourth year, served 22 families and was in active case management on 9 more. Hawkeye administered the case reviews. Rimfire handled the financial documentation. Half-Track provided the referrals to counselors and advocates. Gravel drove people to appointments. Brimstone reviewed every case file personally, reading each one the way he had read the Walmart receipt slowly, the way you read a document you expect to be asked about in a court of law. He was 74 years old. His knees were worse. He came to the monthly meetings in his truck and sat at the end of the table and did not say many words, but the words he said were the kind that closed things. He had a quality developed over 40 years of chapter membership of arriving at the center of a situation by the most direct route possible and identifying with precision what was needed. It was not wisdom in the abstract sense. It was the specific practical knowledge of a man who had sat with many families in many difficult situations and had learned that most of them required the same 3 things in the same order: someone to be present, someone to document, and someone to file. He intended to keep doing the work until he couldn't. He had not identified a date or a condition that would constitute can't. He trusted he would know it when it arrived. Until then, he read the files. There is a thing that happens to a community when one of its institutions fails transparently and publicly in the way that Millhaven's compensation fund had failed, and the institution is then held accountable in the way that Dale Pruitt was held accountable. The thing is not simple, and it does not feel only one way. There is relief of the specific kind that comes when a thing you suspected is confirmed, and the confirmation releases you from the uncertainty. There is anger arriving late at the years of ordinary trust invested in someone who was misusing it. There is the particular sorrow of realizing how many people had noticed something and not said anything, and of recognizing your own notices in that inventory. And there is something else, something harder to name. The specific and complicated feeling of a community that has looked at its own worst institutional self and been forced by the presence of evidence and the fact of conviction to hold it without looking away. The feeling of a community that has learned uncomfortably and permanently that the comforting story, the one that says the people in positions of trust are trustworthy by virtue of their positions, is not a safe story to keep telling without verification. Millhaven was not different from other counties in what Pruitt had done. What was different was the outcome. The documentation, the federal case, the 8 families whose claims were reviewed and in 6 cases honored, the protocol in the school district, the fund. These things had happened not because the system had self-corrected it had not, and left to itself it would not have, but because one 9-year-old had refused to stop showing up, and because the right person had eventually stopped. This is the thing the story is actually about. Not the crime, the correction. Not the failure, the showing up. Not the bent guardrail, the person who stopped at it. On a November morning, 3 years before Nora Hale stood at the headstone in Section C and pressed her palm against her father's words in granite, a man named Ray Hale was driving his semi south on Route 9. He had his thermos. He had the radio. He had the particular unhurried quality of a man who knew this road and was not in a hurry because the road was enough. He saw the motorcycle burning on the shoulder. He did not accelerate past. He did not make the calculation. He pulled over. He crossed the shoulder. He did the thing. It cost him 4 seconds to decide. It cost him his life to act on the decision. It would cost his family 3 years of mason jars and borrowed boots and double shifts and a 9-year-old in an oversized hoodie on a highway shoulder in February. And it would build in the specific arithmetic of one decision multiplied by 68 Saturdays, multiplied by one man who could not stop going back to the place where his life had been given back to him. It would build a stone in a cemetery and a federal case and a fund, and 8 families returned to something they had believed was permanently gone, and a 12-year-old crossing a cemetery lawn to sit beside a stranger and ask who she was looking for. That is what one decision can build. That is what it costs. That is what it is worth. My girl, the whole reason. Dad, he knew. There is one more thing that happened that has not been told yet, and it happened quietly without witnesses, without documentation. And it is the kind of thing that does not appear in legal filings or federal case records or the minutes of monthly chapter meetings. It happened 4 months after the headstone was installed on a Wednesday afternoon in March, when Colt drove to the Millhaven Municipal Cemetery alone and parked and walked to Section C and stood in front of Ray Hale's grave for a while. He had not told anyone he was going. He had not planned to go that particular day. He had been driving back from a job in Hartwell. He did commercial HVAC work, the kind of job that takes you out on the road in other people's buildings for long stretches and then brings you back, and he had taken Route 9 South out of habit, and the habit had brought him to the turnoff for the cemetery, and the turnoff had brought him here. He stood in front of the stone, and he read the inscription. He had read it many times. He knew the inscription by heart. But reading it and knowing it are different things, and he came because he needed to read it, not merely to know it. My girl, the whole reason. Dad. He thought about the 4 minutes. He had tried many times over the previous 3 years to reconstruct those 4 minutes in his memory. The specific sequence of them. The motorcycle fire, the sound of it, the heat. The man coming out of nowhere, the strong arms, the movement away from the wreck. The voice, he couldn't hear the voice, exactly couldn't recover the specific words, but he could remember the quality of it. Calm. Not the calm of someone without fear. The calm of someone who had made the decision and was past the decision and was now just executing it. That was the quality he remembered. The calm of someone who has already decided. He had been unconscious for most of the time between the moment the wreck caught fire and the moment he was clear of it. He had reconstructed the 4 minutes from the official report from Loretta Sims' account from the 3 years of Saturday mornings at the guardrail. He had not reconstructed them from memory because memory had not been available to him in those 4 minutes. He had been inside a burning motorcycle, and then he had been outside it on the gravel of the shoulder, and the man who had moved him from one place to the other had been struck by the truck. He had not had time to hear coming. He stood in front of the stone, and he thought about this, the specific geometry of it, the way Ray Hale had been standing between Colt and the truck when the truck hit him, the way the momentum of the rescue had placed him in that geometry without his having chosen it. He had chosen to stop. He had chosen to cross the shoulder. He had chosen to pull the man from the wreck. He had not chosen where he was standing when the truck came. But he had been there because of every choice that preceded it. Colt had thought about this many times. He had not found a way to think about it that settled the question of what he owed. He had tried. The headstone was part of the attempt. The fund was part of the attempt. The 9 families were part of the attempt. He did not think the attempt would ever be fully complete, and he had made his peace with that. Some debts are not closed. They are simply carried forward into the work of honoring them. He stood for a while longer in the quiet of Section C with the March light coming through the oaks and the cold earth smell of the cemetery and the distant sound of traffic on Route 9 2 miles north. Then he took the small laminated card out of his jacket pocket. He had made it. Months ago had kept it in the inside pocket of his jacket and brought it to the cemetery for the first time today. It was a photograph of the Route 9 guardrail, small laminated in the same way Nora had laminated her photo dollar store contact paper, slightly uneven at the edges, sealed with a glue stick. On the back, he had written in his own handwriting 4 words. He stopped. We stopped. He set it against the base of the headstone, weighted with a small stone from the path so it wouldn't blow away. He stepped back and looked at it there, The small laminated card against the granite, the two inscriptions in two different handwritings, one in marker and one in stone, speaking to each other across the difference of the years. Then he walked back to his bike and rode home on Route 9. He did not stop at milepost 14. He didn't need to anymore. The guardrail was still there. He could see it as he passed the familiar rust and the familiar bend, but it did not pull at him the way it once had. The unease of leaving before something was finished had resolved itself the way deep things resolve themselves, not through a single moment of completion, but through the slow accumulation of the work, the showing up, the doing of the next thing, and then the thing after that. He rode through the March afternoon, and the road opened up ahead of him, and he drove it the way you drive a road that has given you everything and asked nothing back but the willingness to keep riding. In the closet on Clemson Street, the Peterbilt hoodie was folded on its shelf. The mason jar was on the kitchen counter, empty now, its function concluded, kept because some things are kept. In Section C of the Millhaven Municipal Cemetery, against the base of a granite headstone, a small laminated card said, "He stopped. We stopped." And in a classroom on the north side of Millhaven, a 10-year-old girl with her father's brown eyes and her father's handwriting and her father's particular quality of calm in the face of the thing that requires deciding was learning long division with the focused attention of someone who intends to understand it completely, because she was the kind of person who did not begin things she did not intend to finish. She was her father's daughter. She had been demonstrating it for 68 Saturdays before anyone was paying attention. She would continue demonstrating it for the rest of her life in different ways, on different roads, at different card tables, with different laminated signs, or without any of those things at all, with just the willingness to stop to ask to cross the grass. That was the whole inheritance. That was the whole reason. She had it. She had always had it. She just needed someone to finally show up and tell her so. There is a version of this story where Colt Mercer takes the bypass. He has always taken the bypass on weekdays. He takes it for the same reason anyone takes a bypass. It is faster. It is more direct. It avoids the part of the road that has something attached to it. The bypass exists specifically to allow people to get from where they are to where they are going without passing through the places where difficult things have happened. In that version, Colt takes the bypass on the 68th Saturday morning. He is not, after all, required to take Route 9 on Saturdays. The habit had been private and arbitrary, and he could have changed it any week without explanation. In that version, the Saturday is like every other Saturday that preceded it. Nora sets up her card table at milepost 14 in the drizzle and watches the cars pass and writes in her green notebook and reads the numbers $252 against $4,800 with $2,700 more in administrative fees and Section C rezoning scheduled for the following month. In that version, the vote happens. Section C is cleared. Ray Hale's unmarked plot is included in the county mass reinterment, and his name goes into a database that no member of the public knows how to access, and the problem solves itself. Dale Pruitt delivers Meals on Wheels on the second Tuesday of the following month. The base boat is still registered in his wife's maiden name, and Nora is at a card table on a highway shoulder the following Saturday because she does not know yet that it is already too late, because she is the kind of person who does not stop showing up until someone tells her to stop. That is what the bypass costs. That is the specific, ordinary human cost of the bypass of the road that takes you around the difficult thing rather than through it. Not paid in one moment. Not paid with a grand act of avoidance. Paid in the accumulated small choices of people who had things to do and routes to keep and calculations to make, and who made those calculations and who kept driving. Most of them, it should be said, were good people. Most of them had at some point genuine intentions toward the Hale family. The county official who crouched to Nora's eye level. The investigator who wrote down Loretta Sims' testimony. The woman with the clipboard who photographed the sign. The man who bought the lemonade and left a $5 bill without picking up his cup. All of them had felt something. All of them had also at some point between feeling something and doing something taken the bypass. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with. It is not supposed to be comfortable. It is supposed to be recognizable. The specific question this story is asking of the person hearing it is not, are you capable of the grand gesture, the 101 bikes, the federal referral, the 14-city witness collection? Most people are not in a position to do those things, and the story knows that, and the story is not asking for those things. The story is asking a smaller, harder question. The next time you are in a car and you see something that makes you slow down, that makes your brake lights come on, that registers in you as something worth stopping for, what do? Do you accelerate? Or do you cut the engine and climb off the bike and walk across the gravel and ask the 4 words? What was his name? My girl. The whole reason. Dad. He knew. And now, because one man did not take the bypass on a November Saturday morning, and because one 9-year-old girl had not missed a single one of the 68 Saturdays that preceded it, now the stone is in the ground, and the name is in granite, and the fund is serving its 22nd family, and the girl is in a classroom in Millhaven, learning long division, with the focused attention of someone who intends to understand it completely. Pay attention. Listen. Ask the question. Cross the grass. Do not take the bypass. There are things that Nora Hale knows now at 12 that she did not know at 9. Practical things. Useful things. Things that fall under the heading of what remarkable has cost her, which is the phrase Dr. Reese had used in that first Thursday session in Hartwell, and which had stayed with Sandra in the specific way that precise language stays when it names something that has been waiting to be named. She knows that showing up is not the same as being heard. She had shown up 68 times before anyone with the capacity to act had heard her. The showing up was necessary. It was not sufficient. The gap between necessary and sufficient is where most of the loss happens in situations like hers, and closing that gap requires both the person who shows up and the person who listens, and you can only control one of those things. She knows that evidence needs to be written down in the moment it is available in precise language with dates. She had known this at 9. It was why she had written the receipt that same night, but she had known it instinctively, without the language, for why it mattered. Now she has the language. She has the language for a lot of things she once knew only as instinct, which is one of the things that happens when you are given the room to grow. At the pace growing requires when the weight you have been carrying is set down and your hands are free for other work. She knows that the people who fail you are usually not monsters. This is the most complicated knowledge, and she is still working through it at 12 in the way that complicated things require working through, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a lived fact returned to regularly seen from different angles as her vantage point shifts with age. She does not excuse them. She does not simplify them. She holds the complication with the same steady attention she brings to other things that require it. It is a skill. She is developing it. She knows that her father was afraid when he crossed the shoulder of Route 9. She knows this not because anyone told her, but because Colt said, "You get better at letting the right part win," and the implication of that sentence is that there are always 2 parts, and one of them is fear. And Ray Hale had both parts the same as everyone else. He had simply made the decision and let the right part win. She holds this knowledge carefully. It does not diminish him. It makes him more present, more real, more hers, because it means he was a person like other people rather than a symbol, and symbols cannot be missed in the specific way you miss a person, and she needs to be able to miss him specifically. She misses him specifically. She misses the way he took her points seriously. She misses the thermos and the radio and the Marlboro box under the kitchen table that she had always known to replace with a grocery bag, and he had always agreed was better. She misses the specific quality of his attention when she was talking, which was the attention of a man who understood that what she was saying mattered not because she was his daughter, and therefore her words were automatically significant to him, but because she was a person and her words had their own weight independent of who she was to him. She had not had the language for this quality at 5 years old. She had it now. She had built it over 3 years of sitting with what he left behind, and 3 more years of being given the room to let the grief become something other than just grief, something that contained the grief but was larger than it, the way a person becomes larger than the hardest thing that has happened to them, if they are given the resources and the time and the specific presence of people who will sit with them while they do the difficult work of becoming. She had been given those things. The thermal gloves, the appointment in Hartwell, the headstone, the phone number on the plane card handwritten in black marker, the 23 men standing at a respectful distance in a parking lot present without performing presence. She had been given those things by people who had once been given their own version of them. By Roy Fenwick's winter, by the cases that had gone nowhere, and the reports that had been shelved, and the sessions with children in distress in institutional hallways passed forward by men who understood that the thing you receive in your hardest moment is not a gift to keep. It is a gift to give. She understood that now. She was 12 years old, and she was learning long division, and she had her father's handwriting, and her father's quality of attention, and her father's specific, uncalculated instinct to cross the shoulder toward the burning thing rather than away from it. And she was going to spend the rest of her life practicing the skill of letting the right part win. That is the end of the story as it can be told. The rest of it is still happening in Millhaven, Tennessee, on Route 9 in Section C, in a classroom in the Route 9 Family Fund's case files, in the conversations between a 52-year-old biker and a 12-year-old girl who call each other sometimes on ordinary evenings to talk about nothing in particular and everything that matters. The rest of it is the branch. You cannot see the branch from where you are standing. You can only decide whether to act. On the shoulder of Route 9 in Millhaven, Tennessee, at milepost 14 south of Carver's Feed and Grain, there is a bent guardrail with rust on it. The rust is old and permanent. It will outlast the guardrail itself eventually. It will outlast many things. The stone in Section C will not outlast many things. Granite is durable but not infinite. 100 years from now, the inscription may be difficult to read. The period after Dad may have filled with lichen and time. The specific character of the lowercase g open at the bottom may have softened, but the decision was made. The stone is there. The name is in it. And that the decision, the stone, the name is not something that time can take back. My girl, the whole reason. Dad. He stopped. We stopped. She is still here. Somewhere in Millhaven right now. It is an ordinary Tuesday. Nora Hale is in school. Sandra Hale is at the community college in her accounting class, taking notes with the focused precision she developed over 3 years of doing the math on which bills could wait and which couldn't. Colt Mercer is on a job somewhere in someone else's building with his tools and the particular patience of a man who does good work and does not require the work to be dramatic in order for it to matter. The mason jar is on the kitchen counter on Clemson Street, empty, kept. In the inside pocket of Colt's jacket, a plain card with a handwritten phone number has been joined by the small laminated photograph of the Route 9 guardrail, the one he brings to the cemetery, sometimes on ordinary weekdays when he happens to be nearby to check that it is still there against the base of the stone, still weighted by the same small rock from the path. It is still there. Everything is still there that needs to be. And on the shelf in the closet on Clemson Street, the Peterbilt hoodie sits folded with Dad, written on the left sleeve in black marker, in the handwriting of a 9-year-old who decided 68 Saturdays ago that showing up was enough. She was right. It was.